Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act includes sweeping tax breaks and funding for defense and immigration enforcement. But it also brings significant cuts to healthcare and food assistance programs. Later, we'll hear from analysts on the impact to low-income families. But we begin with the potential setback for clean energy and the environment. As Edith Tiansen reports, the rollbacks could derail climate goals in the United States, the world's second largest carbon emitter, and weaken international efforts to curb emissions.
Clean energy tax credits across the United States are now being dismantled, the result of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill signed by President Donald Trump. Opponents say the changes could pose a major roadblock for America's fastest growing source of clean energy.
Why we're cutting out this American industry when we need to win this, this energy race, and it's the fastest, most affordable electrons we can get on the grid.
The White House maintains the federal government has forced taxpayers to subsidize expensive and unreliable energy sources like wind and solar. But some analysts warn the rollback could cause an additional 7 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Carbon Brief, a British-based website, says that's comparable to the entire output of Indonesia alone, the world's sixth largest emitter.
Now, under the current administration, of course, there is an assault on climate action, and there's an assault on the clean energy transition with an effort to now sort of double down once again on fossil fuel extraction and dependence. And so I think what we'll see is that the United States will probably miss that target of reducing carbon emissions by 50% by the end of this decade.
Beyond emissions in the U.S., experts warn of global consequences.
We are the world's largest legacy polluter. We've put more carbon pollution into the atmosphere than any other country, including China. And so if we're not doing everything we can to lower our emissions, then it really creates an excuse for other countries to say, well, the U.S. isn't going to lead on this, then why should we? That's the real danger here.
Climate cooperation between China and the United States, the world's two largest emitters, had been the driving force behind global climate action in recent years, compelling other nations to raise their own commitments. Now, experts fear this retreat could spark a domino effect where other nations scale back their own pledges, undermining global momentum at a critical moment as the planet faces record-breaking heat waves and extreme weather events. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Joining us now from Buffalo, New York, is Paul Fix III. He's an automotive journalist for Car Coach Reports. And Mahmoud is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Climate and Water Initiative and the lead for Middle East climate and water policy at the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health. He joins us from Phoenix. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Mohammed, looking at this one big, beautiful bill, as President Trump calls it, it rolls back clean energy tax credits on wind and solar energy and shifts the United States to greater reliance on fossil fuels. So what impact is this going to have on the environment and also in the broader fight against climate change?
I mean, it has an immediate impact in terms of the fact that completely trying to offload from clean energy sources like wind and solar, and as your reporter had mentioned, doubling down on other forms, specifically things like fossil fuel, to compensate for what could have came from those clean energy sources, you're going to have to increase output on coal, on other forms of more carbon emittive sources. So in a matter of years, in the short term, we could see that impact largely. The other thing on the energy side, which I think maybe gets a little bit lost in the shuffle, is there is a benefit in diversifying your energy sources, right? So at a minimum level, if your energy portfolio or energy supply portfolio is sourced from different areas, then it reduces the chance of failure in terms of different resources being impacted for many reasons, as it's joined to the energy grid. Climate impacts reducing the ability of the energy grid to provide power to different places. We've seen this in the case of Texas a couple of times, in the case of extreme heat, extreme weather, and freezing over the last few years. So there's just a basic benefit in making sure that our energy sources come from a very diverse portfolio.
Right, Mohammed, talking about extreme weather, I mean, we're experiencing that right now. If we look at the heat waves that are sweeping many parts of the country, there's been catastrophic flooding in many parts of the country as well. And then we also have these conditions which have led to power outages in parts of the country. I mean, look at those experiences. Why is it so difficult to make the case that the country needs to seek alternative sources of energy?
It's interesting because it shouldn't be difficult to make the case. Exactly as you outlined, it is a great driver to make sure that our energy sources are diverse. And in fact, relying on energy sources that can meet demand, especially in peak periods right now. You know, the criticism, especially during heat, right? Cooling demands, shoot through the roof, especially for the more southern or warmer states. But in general, energy demand increases during the summer. And part of the criticism against renewables was the fact that it couldn't meet consistently the base demand. Well, that may have been the case years ago, but technology has moved that equation far ahead, where we have things like large-scale storage being developed and R&D on issues to make things like solar and the energy produced from solar and even wind to a certain extent available and reliable in times where that energy source isn't being generated. So that criticism, I think, is shifting away. And so with that in mind, having that diverse energy portfolio and potentially shifting away from coal, right, which is a finite resource, unlike wind and solar, we can at least try to prevent these types of incidences from happening more frequently.
Paul, good to have you with us. Welcome to the show. If we look at this bill and its impact on the electric auto industry, I mean, the bill ends federal tax incentives for electric vehicles, that tax credit of $7,500. That'll run out by the end of September. So if you're going to buy a vehicle, get that credit, you have to do it before the end of September. But, I mean, what kind of impact is that going to have on electric vehicle sales in the United States?
Well, electric vehicle sales are already pretty weak in the United States, and while they're very slowly increasing, the demand just isn't there, and it's actually costing a lot of these manufacturing companies incredible amounts of money to attempt to keep up with the regulations from the United States government to meet these emissions regulation standards that have been put in place for the last 10 years or so. And with that difficulty, we're looking at companies like Stellantis, for example, that over a 2-year period had to pay almost $200 million in penalty fees directly to the U.S. government rather than putting it into R&D to make more efficient vehicles. And at the same time, if they're not able to already hit the existing emission standards of 53 miles per gallon, plus the CO2 emissions that go along with that as well, if they can't meet those standards and they're entirely reliant on the measurement of what kind of emissions come out the tailpipe of these vehicles, okay, so then you go over to electric vehicles. When there's nothing coming out of the tailpipe, there is no tailpipe, but it's not accounting for the amount of emissions that are created in the actual manufacturing process of these vehicles. So while I can't speak exactly to the actual emissions changes, what I can say is that the electric vehicle market is actually getting a huge reprieve right now. It's very interesting what's happening because a lot of investments coming over to the United States due to the tariffs that have been put into place by the Trump administration. And of course, they're still fluctuating as well, but there's already been billions of dollars of investment in electric vehicles. Most of the electric vehicles that are sold in the US are built in the US, which is interesting because companies like Tesla, which completely dominate the market at about 60% in the United States, because they're built in the US, they still get the tax credit up until September 30th. But then Trump signed in another piece of this bill separately, and you can get up to $10,000 off of an automotive loan, up to $10,000 off of a loan in just in interest if you're buying a car from 2025 through 2028. The car has to be built in the US.
Right.
So we're in a very interesting time right now that if you buy a car that's built in the US, which again is quite a lot of them, I have a large list in front of me and it would take far too long to go through all of them. before September 30th, you're going to be saving a lot of money on your car.
Right.
So this could inform what's going to come next in the market, but it's very, very difficult to guess what the future is going to look like.
Mohammed, talking about alternative sources of energy, President Trump, we know, takes a very dim view of some of these technologies that are in the market right now. I mean, take wind turbines, for instance. He's disparaged wind turbines as a source of energy. And this is what he said about this source of energy on his recent visit to Scotland. Let's listen.
We will not allow a windmill to be built in the United States. They're killing us. They're killing the beauty of our scenery, our valleys, our beautiful plains. And I'm not talking about airplanes. I'm talking about beautiful plains, beautiful areas in the United States. And you look up and you see windmills all over the place. It's a horrible thing. It's the most expensive form of energy. It's no good.
So, Mohammed, when you have the president saying things like that, how big is the challenge?
I mean, it's a challenge for those that don't know enough about the things he's talking about. And one of the areas I'd point out is in any type of large-scale infrastructure project in the United States, there's something called an environmental impact assessment. And so even when I think of the placement of windmills, for example, in this case, we don't just necessarily willy-nilly place them wherever, right? There's a scientific assessment piece where trying to place them at optimal locations where they could actually generate wind power, and usually that's not always in a valley. That's another correction I'd like to make. But the reality is the other part of the environmental impact assessment is the placement in those potential locations going to affect flora and fauna? Is it going to affect native species of plants or animals that are roaming the area, or birds in the case that he used? And the additional thing we also that gets considered as part of these assessments and placement of these types of infrastructure, are there also unintended consequences in terms of local populations? I think he's clearly oversimplifying the process, probably because he's not aware of how it's done, but there's a lot of thought and preparation put into any large-scale infrastructure, including the placement of windmills.
Yeah. Paul, very quickly, I've only got 30 seconds. The CEO of Ford recently expressed his deep concerns over the quality of electric vehicles in the United States compared to that in China. And he warned that if the US fails to compete with China, Ford's future, he's talking about his company at this time, he said its future could be jeopardized. Does he have a point?
Yeah, I think so. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like Chinese vehicles are going to come to the U.S. Both the Biden administration and Trump administration have stated that they're not interested in Chinese vehicles coming to market. And a big part of that is because they are much cheaper. They're being subsidized by the Chinese government to allow people to more easily buy these vehicles. And while the technology is very advanced, and lots of people are saying that companies like BYD are making fantastic vehicles, we just don't see a future for that here in the U.S. Now, Ford trying to compete in China, very, very difficult. And without tax credits from the U.S. government to be able to support them, I think they are looking at a difficult future unless they transition to a mixed propulsion solution that allows them to bolster their revenue and then be able to invest in electric vehicles as necessary.
Okay, Mohammed, also very quickly, I've got a little bit of time left. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency this week, it proposed revoking a scientific finding that's been key to regulating greenhouse gas emissions. That finding actually says that greenhouse gas emissions, as well as carbon dioxide, endanger public health. So if this is going to be revoked, what's going to be the impact of that?
I think it's on two tracks, right? So in terms of an administrative tract, it could affect how different agencies or arms of the government utilize that information. So it could affect research, funding, that type of thing. And then to a small extent, again, people that aren't as versed in these topics may believe that as being fact and true. And so that has an unintended consequence on human behavior, how they react to climate change and carbon emissions.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Mohammed Mahmoud, Paul Fix III, thanks to both of you for being with us. Now, looking at some of the other consequences of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it slashes federal food assistance for more than 2 million Americans. The new law eliminates around $186 billion from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as SNAP. over the next 10 years. The program was created by President Lyndon Johnson in 1964 as a way to help low-income families buy nutritious food. Here once again is CGTN's Edith Janssen.
The White House says the so-called Big Beautiful Bill signed by President Donald Trump on July 4th is a once-in-a-generation piece of legislation. But critics say the spending cuts will result in the deepest restructuring of food assistance in decades, raising work requirements and shifting funding burdens from the federal government to the states. They warn the changes could strip benefits for millions of vulnerable Americans, including veterans, children aging out of foster care, and others relying on the food stamp program known as SNAP.
SNAP is the most effective program that we have in the United States for reducing food insecurity rates. There's lots of data that suggests that people enrolled in SNAP have about a 20 to 30% reduced risk of food insecurity. So we expect that cuts to SNAP are going to result in increased food insecurity rates in the United States.
That could mean heavier reliance on food banks, which are also being targeted by the same law.
Unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is also increased strain on food banks and food pantries because this same Big Beautiful Bill also defunds many of those programs. And so what you're likely to see is that people are going to have to start going without.
Not everyone agrees the legislation will worsen hunger. One professor believes the real threat to food security may be tariffs.
I just don't foresee changes to SNAP having a large impact on food insecurity over at least the next couple of years. I think that there's a lot of other things going on that we should be talking about that aren't necessarily part of this bill that we need to be talking about. The first thing is tariffs. Tariffs could be, in essence, a tax that are predominantly borne by low-income Americans, okay? I think tariffs could do some real damage in terms of leading to higher food prices.
Gunderson is more worried about the exclusion of the most vulnerable groups.
The group that we don't talk nearly enough about that has the highest rates of food insecurity, is most vulnerable, are those with disabilities, especially those with mental health disabilities.
Critics warn the changes to some of the benefits and the eligibility criteria will deepen hunger. Others argue certain economic incentives could offset the damage. But with food insecurity rising nationwide, the stakes for many in the country have never been higher. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Joining us now from Los Angeles is Jack Bobo. He's the Executive Director of the Rothman Family Institute for Food Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. And Maha Tahiri is the CEO and founder of Nutrition Sustainability Strategies, LLC, and joins us from Ecuador. Thank you to both of you for being with us. Maha Tahiri, as we just heard in that report, up to 2.9 million Americans could lose their SNAP benefits under this new legislation. So put that into perspective for us. What does SNAP do? Who's eligible? And how would it impact the country's most vulnerable?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. To put that in perspective, SNAP was created as sort of the first line of defense against hunger in America 50 years ago. And it was kind of a promise to families that they wouldn't have to choose between rent and groceries. So for 50 years, the federal government has fully funded SNAP's benefits because hunger, unfortunately, doesn't have state boundaries and it's a national responsibility. So this bill represents the most radical restructuring in SNAP history that we've seen, shifting costs to states that are struggling already with their budgets. And the math is devastating. 44 states currently have errors that exceeds 6%, meaning that they will face massive new costs. Just to give you a few examples, North Carolina alone would owe $438 million, Alabama 172, Ohio 316. So these states are faced with a brutal choice between finding millions, sometimes billions in their budgets that they don't have, or abandon the SNAP program entirely, cutting off millions of Americans. We're not just talking about benefit reduction, we're talking about an entire states potentially leaving the program, creating more food deserts than we have in America, where federal assistance once existed. So in a nutshell, for me, SNAP is not a handout, it's a lifeline. And this legislation is about to cut that lifeline for 2.9 million Americans by forcing states to choose between their budgets or feeding the people. So it's a hard choice.
Jack, even before this bill was passed, the United States Department of Agriculture cut federal programs that spent more than $1 billion annually helping schools and food banks to buy food from local farms. Now, there are children at school who get meals at the beginning of the school day as well as at the end of the school day, and that's done to combat hunger among children. So how are these cuts going to affect those children?
Well, they're going to affect them in a very bad way because there are a lot of benefits of these programs. One, it aligned the interest of nutrition and health for children with the goals of local farming. And so it was a great combination. And these programs, often these funds are not the majority of the funds, but they help to fill a critical gap. And so whenever you cut just a small percentage from it, that just means that schools are not going to have resources in order to deliver these benefits to students. And as Maha just described, many families are struggling. We're entering an environment in which more and more Americans are hungry. And this is taking away just one more tool. At least the children had one healthy meal a day while they were at school. And now they're going to be struggling in order to, schools to fill that gap. And the impact is going to be felt by our children.
Jack, just one point there on something you mentioned. You say we're entering an environment where more and more people are going to be hungry. What's causing that?
Well, through 2024, it was, coming out of COVID was tragic. Many Americans were struggling, and some of the programs that they're ending today were programs that were put into place, particularly for that COVID moment. But then we had the high inflation rates, which then created this additional strain on American households. And so it's combining of COVID plus that. And with tariffs and other things, there are just this confluence of challenges that the households are trying to deal with all at the same time.
Right. Maha, according to the organization Feeding America, that's a nationwide network of food banks and pantries, about 20% of United States children regularly have difficulty getting enough food. We've also seen that food prices have risen, and they've risen pretty sharply, in some instances up to 25%. In the last 5 years. So where does that leave families who are already struggling to put food on the table?
Well, honestly, the timing couldn't be worse because, as Jack mentioned, food prices have skyrocketed since the pandemic, with wage who have barely kept pace, so squeezing family budgeted even more. And as you mentioned, Feeding America is reporting that 20%, that is 1 in 5. I mean, when we talk about things in percentages, we really not necessarily visualize that. 1 in 5 kids already struggle to have enough food. So yet we're implementing larger cuts to SNAP in the program that haven't happened in 50 years of history. So, and also this legislation doesn't only cut benefits, it adds really very strong barriers through expanded work requirement, now covering adults up to 64, parents with teenagers 14 and older. So these are not people who are avoiding to work. Many SNAP recipients are already working 2-3 jobs to really make ends meet in the current economy. And the bills also eliminate something that really does not make sense to me, which is the SNAP Ed, the national largest education program that teaches families how to cook healthy meals, stretch their food budget exactly when they need these skills the most. So we're telling family, food costs more, you get less, and we're taking away the program that teach you how to make it work. So to me, when food prices soar 25%, 1 in 5 kids are already hungry. Cutting food assistance sends a clear message. Policy priorities are completely out of step with kitchen table realities, but also with the MAHA policy, with the Make America Healthier Again, that is really trying to actually make these people healthier. I don't see that there is consistency in these policies.
Jack, there's one other challenge, and that is the fast food industry. It's a massive sector here in the United States, and it's also a staple of the American diet when we look at this. In addition, it's relatively cheap, but how great are the health risks? Because, you know, you get this fast food, which is available at relatively low prices, but, you know, children are consuming this unhealthy, highly processed food. I mean, that's an additional impact on them, isn't it?
It's a real challenge. 42% of Americans are obese, 75% are overweight or obese. And so our diets are having a huge impact. The cost of the US economy is $1 trillion. And so it is a real concern. 10 or 15% of calories are coming from fast food restaurants. Of course, we also have to recognize why are consumers going. And in many ways, they're choosing it because they're stuck between tough choices. They can't afford the alternatives. And so while choosing to consume food at these restaurants is maybe not helping them from a health and nutrition perspective, a lot of it has to do with poverty. You know, those are the tough choices that families have to make. If you're working 2 jobs and you come home and you have to feed your children, you may choose to stop at a fast food restaurant in order to be able to afford to feed the family. You know, those SNAP benefits provide $6 a day for food purchases. That's $2 a meal. And so, you know, how do you make ends meet? So these two challenges of you know, nutrition and obesity are also related to those issues of hunger and poverty.
Maha, you mentioned a moment ago that, you know, families would have to make these tough decisions on either paying the rent or buying groceries. And we can add one more thing to that, and that is healthcare costs. And if we look at what's being called the big, beautiful bill, that legislation cuts $1 trillion from Medicaid, which will also put stresses on household budgets. You know, people juggling all these things to try and make ends meet. So that's going to have a sort of domino effect, isn't it?
Well, it certainly will. And you're talking about $1 trillion. I think this is creating a perfect storm in an ironic way. It's not perfect. It's completely imperfect storm because families will face daily decision between food and healthcare, for example. And when people cannot afford to go to doctor visit, they skip preventive care and medication, and that leads to emergency room visits, which costs more to taxpayers. So poor, and there are many universities, including the one that I'm involved in, and Tufts University, that have shown that poor nutrition from reduced food access directly increases rates of diabetes, heart disease, chronic conditions, versus disease that drive, and these are diseases that actually truly drive up healthcare costs. So children experiencing food insecurity show higher rates of development delay, learning difficulties, and behavioral problems that follow them through life. We're doing something that is not reversible. It is irreversible. So this seriously creates a vicious economic circle, health problems worsen financial stress, making families even more food insecure, which worsen health outcomes.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for being with us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.